sometimes it just doesn't want to, like, iris itself. Just iris, darn it. Welcome to.
Impressive new opening. I love it.
It's been there. The iris has always been there, but it's never worked. Joseph Mallozzi is joining us, everyone. Welcome to episode 355 of Dial the Gate, the Stargate Oral History Project. Joe,
Amazing.
welcome, sir. Welcome back.
Thank you.
You were with us for, I think, 250.
Really?
Yeah. Yeah, it's been that long.
Wow.
So, and you know what else makes today special?
What?
We now have one more episode, counting this one, than the Stargate television franchise.
Wow. All right. Let's do it. So I
Right?
kind of switched over to YouTube so I can check out the chat as well.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So you are in Montreal, did you say?
I am in Montreal.
What's going
I mean,
on?
going back and forth. Just what they say, there's nothing good ever happens after 10 p.m. or the age of 90. So my mother's 91.
See.
And so she's kind of needs the extra help. And then my sister's, here with her, but my wife and Sharky and I come by every month or so to kind of help out.
Absolutely. Well, good for you, man. And there's nothing more important than family. So someone is pinging me now. Give me just a second here. Let me stop that.
Perhaps.
And you've just
Family?
you've just
Not
got,
as important, unless you're doing like a live broadcast. And then,
exactly. Those little things. So
it's not, family's not quite as important.
it's quite possibly, my parents. So, yeah, you reach that point in your life when you're. I once heard, and I think it's certainly the case. You are never truly, in many cases, you are never truly an adult until you are responsible for taking care of another person. And I think there's a lot to say to that, because it's not very easy. Hang on just a second here. Someone is saying that
There's no sound on your end.
I'm
they're saying?
broadcasting. The sound's broadcasting. That's a
Can
good
you
one.
hear me?
Yeah. Hang on,
No, we
guys.
can hear you. Okay, David, not yet.
David, not yet. That's weird.
No sound, no sound.
Okay. I will re-upload this, everyone, so that won't be a problem later on. Apologies for that. So this will get a re-upload after the end of the show. You should be able to hear me now. That was a strange setting. Every time you reconfigure something, you never know how it's going to go.
Yes.
But no, I think that it's the case. So at a certain point in your life, you gotta give back. So
Yes.
giving back. So
I hope you guys can hear David. If not,
should be able
then
to hear me now.
yes. Okay,
What
excellent.
it was. I had a signal, but it was the wrong setting, and I've never had that one before.
All right.
Just a second, let me double check here. Yes. Okay, good. We have. I recently had several members of the United States military, one representing each of four branches. I had Air Force, Army, Marines, and Navy on the channel yesterday. We recorded it last week, but I had them on yesterday. And let me tell you, it was fascinating to sit down with people who know their branch, but also love the show. And what I kept hearing again and again were how pleased they were with how the show portrayed the armed services and the realism of it. And only just small nitpicks here and there, but the spirit of what it is to serve was conveyed so astutely. How much time did you... The Air Force got to read every script in advance, is that right? That's my
Yeah, by the
understanding.
way, chat is saying they still can't hear you, but I will answer that question nevertheless. Because David's talking about the various branches of the armed forces
Yes.
that are huge fans of the show, and he asked me about the Air Force vetting of the scripts, and that was the case for SG-1. Like throughout SG-1's run, the Air Force read all the scripts, vetted all the scripts. They weighed in with notes very rarely, but the notes were really more along the lines of, when we should be saluting, when our character should not be wearing hats, and so on. But yeah, I mean, SG-1's always kind of a positive portrayal of the military. I just did a recent interview where we talked about the difference between Star Trek's Prime Directive and the Antithesis, which was like SG-1, and the fact that Star Trek always had kind of this hands-off policy when it came to you know involving themselves in off-world affairs. Although I would argue in that original series, I remember like at least a half dozen times when they went against a prime directive, whereas in SG-1 we used to do it all the time, and they used to the various team members, especially SG-1, always had kind of carte blanche to assess the situation on a kind of a regular basis or unique basis. Um, so working with the military was great. Obviously like I mentioned, they vetted all the scripts. We had two generals, Air Force generals, appear on the
Hmm.
show, which is also great. But I was always heartened more than anything by the letters and postcard we would always receive from people serving overseas or just serving in the armed forces who would always take the time to write and say how much they love the show, how much they love the positive portrayal of the military, the men and women in uniform. And I know we used to get like flack for that as well. People, certain fans did not appreciate the fact that they felt we were glorifying the military. But I mean, SG-1 was a military unit,
Yeah.
and they were the good guys. So
Can you repeat this for me, just in case they can't hear? Was there, and I'm using this as a test as well. Was there ever a concern when you were writing that it was the concern of not trying to make a propaganda piece in any way, or have anything come off as even
yeah,
propagandistic ever in the back of your mind?
no, there was never a time during the show's run where we were concerned about writing propaganda, if you will. At the end of the day, the stories came about. I mean, obviously, you always want to come up with kind of those unique hooks and story ideas, but it ultimately always came down to the characters. And our characters, like I said, they were the good guys and they were military. And you may not have liked the fact that they were military and portrayed in a positive light, but that was the show. And it was never, I don't recall ever a time when there was a discussion or internal discussion about shying away from that. I mean, there were always the occasional decisions that you kind of walk that gray line, in the other side where O'Neill orders them to shut the iris.
Hmm.
And
Yep.
I mean, it was not a military decision per se, and yet, I mean, as a commanding officer, he gave that order. So, I mean, it's something that we always kind of touched upon, but again, like I said, it's not something that we shied away from or basically really thought, oh, this is, we shouldn't be portraying the military in a positive light.
Did they ever say no to anything?
Throughout the show's run, I don't recall the military ever shooting down an idea. This would be probably more of a question for Brad and Robert,
Okay.
because I wasn't around for those early years, and the first three seasons is when you work out all the bugs, and after that, it's very smooth sailing. So that's a question for Rob or Brad.
Absolutely. I always appreciated your attention to detail and making sure that the show felt real. One of the points of perspective from yesterday was that were this real, there would have been a greater leverage of the other branches of the military, particularly the Marines and Army Rangers in terms of scouting and things like that. As far as you're concerned, was Army represented as well on the base, going through the gate and going on missions? We don't really see the Army. But obviously, James McDaniel is portrayed as General Maynard in four-star General Maynard on the Hayes administration's. He's the he's advising the president, so they're aware.
Yeah, I mean the Army is obviously very aware of the operation, but I mean, I always assumed that it was an Air Force operation, and not to say that the Army, the Marines, maybe in some instances the Navy were not involved, but it was really an Air Force operation.
Okay. Guys, I'm sorry. I've never seen this before.
David apologizes for his inability to apologize.
Yep, that's
Or
exactly
have we hear his
it.
apology.
Yeah, device, sure, in V7. I've got a waveform. It's transmitting.
Keep working on it. By the way, someone asked about the Jaffa, the creation of the Jaffa.
Yes, please.
That is a question. Again, Paul, my former writing partner Paul, and I joined in this show's fourth season, so I can't really answer any questions with regard to the creation of kind of those original concepts like the Jaffa, and the like, just because I wasn't around for it.
Well, let me see. Let me get some. Let me have you repeat this. So Marina wants to know: were there any fans of Space Above and Beyond in the writers' room, and did that show ever have any input?
Okay, Marina asks if there were any fans of Space Above and Beyond in the room, and whether that had any impact on the show's creative. To be honest with you, I don't think so.
Okay.
I don't believe so. I mean, when we were in production, I think there were a lot of great shows on at the time. Babylon 5 and I think Next Gen and Voyager at the time. Deep Space Nine. And I guess Space Above and Beyond is like late 1990s. But I was kind of aware of what shows people were watching in the room and what shows people weren't. Like Carl Binder, for instance, would always watch Lost with his wife, and he would always come in. He would always come back every. I think Lost was on Mondays, and he would always come in on Tuesdays and complain about the show. And we were like, "Why are you watching it? Every time you come in, you're so angry." And he's like, I have to see what happens. I have to basically find out." And then at the end, well, I don't know. So he was a big fan. I mean, I think Brad watched a bit of Battlestar. I did not at the time. Most of us watched Firefly, which we quite enjoyed. I don't remember anybody talking about Space Above and Beyond. And then there were the shows like Babylon 5 that I didn't discover much later. Just because when I'm in production, I rarely have time to watch anything.
Was there ever a concern to stay away from Star Trek? Or were you encouraged to watch Star Trek and shows that Stargate had similar tracks on in terms of the type of stories? If you could repeat.
Interesting question. So David just asked if we were encouraged to watch Star Trek in order to either steer clear of the storylines or what have you. And I can tell you no. I think Brad watched Star Trek: The Next Generation. I think Brad watched a lot of sci-fi. I think Paul watched, my former writing partner watched Next Gen as well. I keep on saying I didn't watch Next Gen just because I thought those uniforms the first season were so ill-fitting and weird looking that I just couldn't get on board. And I later watched Voyager, but I mean, it wasn't really to avoid particular storylines, simply because they'd done so much at that point. There was no way we could have caught up with them. But like, South Park would do that. They did that episode where it was like Simpsons already did it. That was kind of a running theme on Stargate in the room. When someone would pitch out an idea, Brad would invariably say Star Trek already did it, and so we'd have to shelve the story and move on. New idea.
Were there ever any situations where you would release something and find out after the fact, oh, I didn't know about that over there, and that is eerily similar? Like Beneath the Surface, you guys in season 4, and then Voyager went on and did Workforce Part 1 and 2, except that's kind of the reverse.
Yeah, so Dave was asking about similarities between Star Trek and SG-1 episodes. And really, there are two that come to mind. One is the episode you mentioned, David, Beneath the Surface, and I think Workforce,
Uh-huh.
Star Trek Voyager. But what's interesting about those two is both episodes kind of came out around the same time. So it's not as if, one show watched the other show and maybe subconsciously was inspired by the story. Both episodes had to have been developed, prepped, and produced around the same time. So it was just kind of parallel ideas.
Hmm.
We talk about the great zeitgeist where, suddenly everybody's doing these types of stories. The other example, of course, is uh, my least favorite Stargate episode, Emancipation, which is very eerily similar to an episode of The Next Generation that it turns out happened to be written by the same writer. So those are the two. But I'm sure there are other. If you deep dive hard enough, you'll find similarities between Star Trek and SG-1 and probably SG-1 and other sci-fi shows as well.
Absolutely. There's only so many stories that can be told, and
Mhm.
when you fit everything into a certain box and you have your show established the way it is, those are the kind of stories that you create.
Yeah.
Um, I am dumbfounded as to why this is not working, Joe, and I do apologize. So let's Christina Graziella. She asks the next question. If you want to say that name first, or Christina.
Christina Graziella asks a question.
Oh, if I wouldn't cry and I would be laughing. Why wasn't the strong emotional bond between Carter and O'Neill developed into a confirmed romance?
Okay,
Because none
so
of that ties into what we were talking about earlier.
Christina's asking, wants to know why we didn't follow through on the Carter O'Neill relationship. Good question. It really came down to military regulations. It was kind of deemed improper for them to hook up or have a relationship while they were serving together. Um, Once O'Neill left SG-1 and assumed command, still not exactly, proper. But we had sort of discussed the possibility of them dating, and we had kind of dropped hints in episodes that ended up on the cutting room floor. I think
Trio.
in Trio, yeah, Carter alludes to the fact that she's dating someone, and it hints very strongly that it's O'Neill. Um, and I think in one of the planned movies that never saw the light of day, there was kind of confirmation where um, I think someone calls up Carter and O'Neill ends up answering on the Zoom, and then Carter comes on. Sadly, they not see the light of day. So, that is essentially why we did not pursue the relationship.
Were you aware that Michael Greenburg and his writing partner submitted a pitch to MGM earlier this year?
I was not aware that Michael Greenburg, former executive producer on SG-1, and his writing partner submitted a pitch to MGM earlier this year for a new series, I assume. I don't know, is that true?
Hmm. He
Or,
came on last week and told us, and it would have included our RDA in the pitch. Jack.
well, what do you know? I did not know that. This is why, I really need to, I'm remiss. I need to catch up on Dial the Gate episodes, but apparently Michael Greenburg came on
Yeah.
last week and mentioned the fact that he had actually pitched a new series. How did it go? Or when did we go into production?
They've not heard back. So, but knowing that
Have
it
not heard
exists is
back.
awesome.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
And I know that Brad submitted one. Do you know anyone else who submitted one?
In terms of submitting, you're talking about pitches and
Pitches to Amazon MGM. Yeah.
uh, I at the end of the day, I'm not really the guy to ask.
Mm.
I mean, I didn't know about Michael's thing, um, and I knew about Brad's script, which is great by the way, and pitch by virtue of the fact that he asked me to read it and give notes on the script. So, I mean, in terms of like, anything related to kind of new Stargate. I keep on saying, and as I've said for many, many years, uh, it's going to happen sooner than later. Although, I've been saying this for, like I said, many, many years.
Of course.
But I'm convinced. I mean, it's such a valuable franchise and valuable properties. It just doesn't make sense uh, for it to lie fallow for so long. I think Amazon is just being very careful. They're taking the time. They want to make sure that they do it right, which is, heartening. You don't want to give them that. So, I don't know, fingers crossed, sooner than later.
Can you give us an update on the state of the industry up there and kind of how it's running parallel to everything happening, down here from
Uh,
advancements in tech and everything else, and
okay, yeah, sure.
the volume of work being created and available?
David asked for an industry update, specifically in Canada in relation to the US. And I think in this case, usually Canada is always one step behind the US. But in the case of the industry, we were one step ahead by essentially being in kind of this weird recessionary vibe where nothing was getting bought. And anything that was getting bought was getting bought on the cheap. I remember years ago when the all the more broadcast channels were popping up, and more streamers were popping up, and everybody was working, and I thought this is insupportable. Sooner or later there's going to be contraction, and it's happened. Uh, it's the industry has been kind of bleak for the past, I want to say, 4 or 5 years
Mm-hmm.
since COVID. Very tough to make sales unless you have talent attached. By talent, I mean big name actor attached. And even if you do sell a show, they're going to make sure that you do it for a very lean budget. So it's a challenge. It's very challenging out there.
Yeah. Well, do you hold out hope for the future that things are going to improve, or do you think that this is the new normal?
Uh, I I want to say I'm ever the optimist, but that's not true. I'm quite the opposite. However, I do think things do have to improve just because sooner or later they have to buy something. You have to air something, you have to stream something. And so I think eventually things are going to go to back to the way they were, which was not bad. But right now it's, we're going through a correction, like a market correction. I think, hopefully in a year or two, we'll be back to, making a lot of great TV.
Awesome. I think everyone can hear me now.
Oh,
Um,
hey,
yeah,
David's
so
back.
I had, just so that everyone knows, I had, thinking toward archiving purposes, I've been reconfiguring to separate the audio channels of this so that I can have my guests in one lane and me in another lane. And I set it up on Wormhole Extremists fine. And for whatever reason on Dial the Gate, when I enabled it for Dial the Gate last night, it made it so that that wouldn't work on my end. So I don't know why. So thank you for bearing with me, Joe, and being my guinea pig.
Yeah, no problem. Anytime.
So anything specific in the popper in terms of updates on what you are working on that you might want to hint at, or
Always
anything
juggling.
that you can drop nuggets
Yeah,
on?
I mean, I recently went out with an adaptation of Larry Niven and Jerry Pournelle's classic, The Molten God's Eye, with Harry Kloor, this brilliant
Okay.
screenwriter. He worked on Voyager. He created Earth Final Conflict. It's like double PhD. Uh,
Wow.
yeah, and I think it's like something like AI and robotics. I mean, just brilliant guy, super nice guy too. And I think he was friends with Larry Niven, or he's friends with Larry Niven, and so I was brought on. He had basically developed pretty much the entire package, and he and I had kind of worked out a pitch, and we went out and, as we said, we talked about the state of the industry, and selling something's very tough. Selling a space opera is even tougher.
I
Selling
bet.
a bigger budget space opera, which this one very much would be, was even more of a challenge. So unfortunately, we didn't get any traction on that. Otherwise, I'm out with a couple of crime shows. I'm a big crime show fan, by the way. I'm about 800 shows into this international crime binge I've been doing
Oh my God!
for almost like 3 years now. If you guys want recommendations for a great Argentina prison drama or Romanian gangster series, I'm your guy. And I'm about 190 2025 crime book releases into 2025. So I read about, I wouldn't say no, I'm saying I'm into about 100 and almost 190, but a third of them I don't finish just because after a while I'll give them all 50 pages, and then if they don't, if they're just dumb, I'm out.
Okay.
So I've got two shows out. One is kind of a fun murder mystery series. Another one is a action adventure series. And then I'm consulting on other shows that are kind of poised to development. And then on Wednesday, I have a pitch to a studio. I'm going to pitch them a TV version or adaptation of one of their cult films. I can't say too much about it right now, but I'll tell you if it's a yes or no, I'll tell you after the fact. But this one will be a lot of fun. Kind of a mix of horror, fantasy, 90s film. You guys, those are the hints. You guys can figure it out. Do your detecting.
Did you ever? Please keep me, in the loop on this stuff moving forward. We're obviously going to keep an eye on your blog. Those are all linked below, as well as Sharky's.
Sharky appreciates your
feed.
support, by the way.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Did you ever see Earth Final Conflict?
I never saw Earth Final Conflict.
It
as I said, I think Earth Final Conflict was on around the same time that we were.
Yes.
I say we were. It was airing around the same time we were airing, but in all fairness, we were airing for like 17 to 20 years, so that's a pretty big window. As I said, when I'm in production, I don't watch a lot, but there were certain shows I did watch, like Firefly. Babylon 5, I only discovered after the fact, later, and I really, really enjoyed it. Earth Final Conflict is not one that I watch, but I could put it on my watch list. I always used to get mixed up between First Wave and Earth Final Conflict. Which was the one that Roger Cross was on?
I can't remember him.
Okay,
I definitely haven't seen.
Cross.
Yeah. We recently had him. I don't believe he would have been on. He must have been First Wave, because I don't recall him on Earth Final Conflict. I only bring it up because, well, in addition to you working with the gentleman, it was the last show of 3 or 4 sci-fi shows on Saturday nights. The first of which was Stargate SG-1.
Oh, I did not.
That's how not on Showtime or on Sci-Fi Channel, but on syndications on Saturday nights in my local market. And so I finished up the night always with this sci-fi soap opera, Gene Roddenberry's Earth Final Conflict.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Marsha says, "Woohoo! Happy pitching, Joe. Best of luck." Thank you, Marsha. I was going to say another show that was being developed or that was in production around like the same time was Lexx. It was like this weird German, Canadian, I don't know, U.S. co-production where they were flying around in this dragonfly ship, which is like amazing. Yeah. So interesting to note that Paul and I were up to showrun Lexx before we got Stargate. And we were under consideration for Lexx, and then we ended up taking Stargate, and who knows? And I mean, there's so many. I think back to how many sort of we talk about going out with pitches and original pitches, as very well. A lot of what we do as writers, but often as showrunners, we are considered for different productions. So Lexx was one. What's it called? Shadowhunters. On the heels of Stargate, we talked to the producers about that before I went to production. American Gods. That was another one that we had a conversation about.
So cool.
There are several more, but just shows that I never watched them, so I don't know if.
So the recent American Gods, the one that went to production.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Man. Yeah. Lexx. There is no way that show was made by people who were not high. It's not possible. That was so trippy. Do you know who among your team on the cast loved Lexx? Do you remember?
On my team, can you give me
Among the
is it
cast.
SG1?
Yeah.
It was SG1?
Yeah.
Oh, it'd have to be Chris Judge, wouldn't it?
Don.
Dawn.
Don
Really?
was a huge fan of Lexx.
Did he like the German actress? Was he a big fan of
He didn't get
her?
specific, but
Yeah.
he just said that was like, in terms of like modern sci-fi, like what he would enjoy, that's what it was. And I just remember at the time only having seen it within the past couple of years.
Yeah.
And I watched a couple of episodes. And I'm like, what is this show? It was not for me. I gave it a reasonably fair shake.
Have you watched Farscape?
Some of it. I watched
Okay.
it.
How does it compare to Farscape? Because Farscape was pretty out there, and I love Farscape.
Tame.
Tame,
No,
really?
Farscape is tame compared to Lexx.
Yeah. Oh, well, interesting. I mean, Farscape I love because it had that sense of humor. Did Lexx have the humor, or was it just kind of weird for weird?
Yeah, but it was
Okay. Okay.
it was very titillating. And
Okay.
Farscape had a more balanced amount of humor, like Stargate did, humor and adventure.
Yeah.
Whereas, I mean, Lexx was just innuendo after innuendo after innuendo, and very, like, fair comparison, very, very astute observation in terms of very, like, someone was tripping when they made this. It's very, the production values, I think, in Farscape were far superior, probably just because they either had more money or could make it stretch further where it was filmed. But it's
Well,
interesting.
maybe I will. Well, yeah, it's interesting. Also, about a couple of months ago, I did something called the Best of series, where I asked fans to choose like the top 32 best sci-fi shows, and then choose the best episodes that were representative of those shows. And we watched them, and then I think 3 times a week, I would get on with a co-host and discuss, I think, 2 or 3 of them. And it's interesting that, out of those 32 shows, there are only 9 that I actually watched from beginning to end. And there was almost 20 that I had hardly watched at all. And it was interesting for me to sort of, after watching the best episodes, to consider whether I would change my mind and, or be compelled to watch them. I have to say, in most cases, no. Actually, Babylon 5 was a show that I watched the first 3 of 5 seasons of, and then I kind of got distracted and never finished the last 2. But watching that episode and discussing it with it was Tom Luongo, we discussed Babylon 5 and I think Andor. It really made me want to go back and watch, those first 3 seasons and the last 2 as well. So that was a rare occasion. But I mean, the Star Wars just kind of never did it for me. I mean, that's not true. When I was a kid, I loved Star Wars until Return of the Jedi.
Of course.
And then that pretty much killed my love of yeah. So I never watched any Star Wars and Star Trek. I haven't watched, and well, I think what was it? Star Trek Prodigy or Lower
Prodigy
Decks
was the Nickelodeon one. It's the
no, sort of Lower Decks. So Lower Decks.
Yes, it's like Rick and Morty style cartoon.
Yeah, we ended up doing like 5 or 6 Star Treks. The original, Deep Space Nine, Next Gen, Voyager, Enterprise, and I guess. What did I just say?
Lower Decks.
Lower Decks.
Yeah. I enjoyed
which one is the car? Yeah.
Lower Decks was the cartoon. There's 2 now. The cartoon and then the animated one.
No, Prodigy.
Prodigy is the Nickelodeon computer animated one, and it's good.
No. God, no.
Yeah.
It was a live action one.
Live action. Well,
but it was a crossover of the live action and the
so it's technically a Discovery episode, and yes, it's a Lower Decks
Discovery.
You sure? Oh no, I'm sorry. Strange New Worlds. I'm sorry.
That's the one.
Which started on Discovery.
Yeah.
Yes, that's a good show. Yeah. So Jack Quaid and Tawny Newsome, they cross into the Strange New Worlds universe, and it was definitely clever. Yeah. I'm just not a big fan of modern science fiction as much. There are, in terms of space shows, the only thing that is on in recent years that I bet you heard that one.
What?
Thunderclap, loud one.
Oh.
The only thing that I've seen recently in terms of space shows that I have truly loved is the Orville. And
Well, somebody just asked, I wonder if Joe has also watched the Orville. And Orville was one of the top 32 shows and one of the episodes that we watched.
which do you recall which episode you watched?
Yeah, it was the episode where I don't know the characters'
That's fine.
names, but it's a great premise. I mean, he goes they travel back, I think, or he ends up being
Married.
thrown 30 years back, yeah, into the past or something,
Yeah.
and yes, he's married. He's waiting for them to rescue him,
Oh,
and time passed, and he settled down and
oh,
married, had a kid, and it's a great premise. But I thought that it was just it could have been such a kind of a heart-rending episode, but they didn't really go there. I mean, it was kind of it almost felt like kind of an imposition
yeah. And on
to
top of
him, and
that,
then it gets,
go ahead.
you know, yeah, it just gets quickly settled, and because he doesn't have any memories at the end, he's like, oh well.
They traded him out. Yeah. On top of that, so there's an episode in season 3 called Twice in a Lifetime that he's referring to everyone. And the second season introduced the character through her iPhone being found in a time capsule. And he took the iPhone and he took her to the holodeck and he recreated her. And so that's the second episode, which you would have really appreciated much more had you seen the first one. But yes, that's a good one.
Great sci-fi ideas. I mean, like I say, I don't watch the Orville, but everything I've heard about the show makes me feel like it is, the love child of a true Star Trek fan.
I think it's a great. If Galaxy Quest didn't exist, this show would not exist. That's really what it is. And the Orville, casts are going to Star Trek conventions now, and absolutely
Amazing, great.
In terms of modern sci-fi, I'm going to share mine, and then I'd like you to percolate yours. What do you think is the best thing on TV right now? And for me, unquestionably, right now, that's Severance.
I'm going to have to take your word for it. No, I'm going to take your word for it because I'll be honest with you, I don't watch a lot of sci-fi just because I am so much into the crime genre, and for a couple of reasons. I obviously I enjoy the crime genre, but I've been disappointed with sci-fi, like a lot of modern sci-fi to date. I mean, and I only have so much time to invest in watching or reading.
That's fair.
So yeah, I've heard great things about Severance. So
Ben Stiller.
You're not the only one.
He's a huge Trekkie. He's a huge sci-fi fan. And the first season was fantastic. The second season
Did you say Ben Stiller?
Ben Stiller.
Huh.
Producing and directing. It's exceptional.
Okay. That's not really a huge sell point for me, but interesting.
It's like I had the same reaction when I saw Justin Timberlake on a masthead for a movie. I was like, give me a break. Oh my God, he's good. And it's just one of those things. So I challenge you to sit down and watch a few of them because it's sci-fi, but it's in an office space. And
I guess one of the reasons why I never checked out Severance was I think 3 years before Severance came out, I was developing a show with a company called Partition, the show, not the company, about a guy who, or basically invent a technology that allows you to compartmentalize your life. And so your work life self doesn't know what the private self is doing, and the private self doesn't know what the work self is doing. That was the basic premise, and then I'm sure that, it would have been taken in completely different ways.
Sure. Yeah.
But just if, for instance, if I all of the shows that if ever I'm up for a show and I don't get it, then the chances are good I will never watch the show. So yeah. So it's something along those lines.
Marcia wanted to know, Joe, if you were ever to cosplay a character, a Stargate character.
A Stargate character.
Yeah. And also, I would like to know, any kind of character. See, for me, I'm not going to cosplay unless I look like the part. And I can't
Oh
think of
yeah?
anyone
Okay.
that I wouldn't be. I would
I
have to have a mask on because I don't think I look like
well,
anybody.
I would absolutely, if I had to cosplay, I would go as either Tanat or Jap. Those two sort of crazy rubber-faced
The
aliens.
Oranians.
Uh, yes, yes,
Oh
yeah,
my
yes.
God.
I love those two goofballs. So
You should have
yeah,
had
and
them back
I'm kind of
more.
a goofball at heart. So those are if I was going to cosplay, yeah,
Now,
they would be my choices. One and
there's
two.
something about, I think that you could have had with Tanat and Jup a serious episode slash like comedy episode, like focused
Hmm.
on them, but you
Hmm.
really would have had to toe the line in terms of not making it absolutely ridiculous because their
Yeah,
eyes don't move. You know, they're kind of weird looking guy, well, definitely
yeah.
weird looking guys, but I think it could work.
I yeah, I mean maybe whenever Amazon launches this new Stargate series, they're going to go down along the lines of Star Trek and open the doors to potential other spin-offs and the Snap and Jop show is the one I want to do.
Andrew said David would make a good
Yeah.
NID character. Oh,
Oh yeah.
gee, thanks. Uh, God.
By the way, Christine asked, how did you get the idea of the Latin for the Beginners book by Joseph Mallozzi, PhD, in the Window of Opportunity episode? So that was not me. We were in the concept meeting for the episode. And the concept meeting is when we get together with the various department heads to discuss, go through the script, what we need. And someone from the props asked, what kind of a book should he be reading in this scene? And Peter DeLuise, who was the director, said, should be Latin for the Novice by Joseph Mallozzi. And so that's what the prop department did. And that book is somewhere downstairs on the shelf in my mother's basement. It's an actual Latin book. I did not write it. My Latin is kind of rusty, but it exists.
How much could I pay you for that?
No, it's not even worth it.
That's not true.
Yeah,
It's from the greatest episode of the show. I
yeah.
would love to
I
own that.
I have kept hardly anything from my days on
Oh, okay.
Stargate. Now I go back and regret it. I should have,
I'd
I
love
should have
to
just
buy it from
grabbed
you.
everything. Yeah,
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 or
yeah.
auction it or
All right.
something. Yeah, no,
Yeah.
that is everything
Mhm.
hangs on that.
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah,
Potteremus,
yeah, yeah.
Potterat.
Yeah.
This is a bad idea. I have always been blown away by the caliber of people that you got. And I'm not even sure if you'd be willing to say,
Mhm.
because it's none of our business.
Yeah.
But maybe you know someone that wouldn't care. I was with Christopher Judge in Dragon Con this past Dragon Con, and
Hmm.
he was talking about the caliber of the talent that you guys would get,
Hmm.
specifically because they were doing it for their kids or for their
Yeah.
family, because they
We got
knew
Isaac
people.
Hayes. We had Wayne Brady. Those two sort of really come to mind as huge fans of the shows
Wow.
who basically were on because their family or they were loved it. I remember going down costume fitting to say hi to Wayne Brady and introduce myself, and he was like in his
Jaffa.
Jaffa garb and feeling really feeling it.
There were, and Christopher said that there were certain people that you guys wouldn't have been able to attain normally who gladly cut their
Yeah.
rates
Hmm.
to come on. So I think it speaks to the quality of what you guys were doing. I know
Hmm.
personally Mel Harris, her son Byron, was a huge fan of the show and came to set during production to see it filmed. And that's how she got stuck in everybody's head to come back
Hmm.
as Oma. And so it's kind of
Huh.
a tail wagging the dog kind of
Yeah.
situation where it's like, oh yeah, she would be perfect for this.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, there were, I mean, we were always amazed by the caliber of the talent we were able to get. Um, uh, but I mean, there were times when we reached out that we tried to get actors that we just, weren't able to. I think, I'm just trying to think of who we went out to that ultimately passed. Who was the actor from? I'm terrible with names.
That's all right.
Uh, from ER, Goran.
You're not talking about Clooney, are you?
No, no.
Okay.
Um, what was his name? I'm just trying to look it up here.
And I just looked up the reference for tail wagging the dog. That is not what I meant.
No.
I wanted to apologize to everyone. I was like, I don't think I
Okay.
used that term right. Gordon?
Gosh.
Someone from ER you were interested in?
Yeah, so
Okay.
he actually had met Amanda, and the two got along famously. And we were like, "Hey, if he wants to do an episode," and he
Yeah.
actually loved the idea of doing an episode, but he was doing ER at the time; it could not. And we reached out to Jonathan Frakes once, I think, to direct an episode, but again, for whatever reason, he was not able to do it.
Hmm.
What's his name? Michael. Yeah, he was in Better Call Saul, Saul's
Oh.
brother.
Oh yes, Michael McKean, I think.
Yeah, Mike. So we reached out to him,
Oh,
and
he's
and
good.
yes, he is great, but it was a pass from him.
Yeah.
I'm trying to think.
My understanding was that George I can't pronounce his last name for dirt. George Dzunza, who played Jim in Threads. You guys were searching for like a John Goodman type, and I kind of
Oh
got it
yeah,
strapped around my head that John Goodman had actually been approached to play the character.
I don't know about that. I don't recall actually ever, but
Okay,
that's a question for Rob because
okay,
we used to run our own episodes. So if
sure,
you wrote the episode, you would oversee all the aspects of production, including casting. But when it came into casting, everyone would kind of weigh in. As I said, I mean, yeah, I remember several times when we put out, a call for a certain character, and our LA casting agent would send a list, and we go through the list, and sometimes, there were some impressive names, and other times, Brad or Raw would be like, no, we don't want to work with that guy, just
yeah,
because we
sure,
would heard terrible things. I want to name names, but
yeah.
there were a couple of times when we were like, no, this is it just you're just opening up a can of worms. Uh, if you work with this guy, and then the agents, I think, would reach out and be like, well, he was going through a rough time when he was shooting this episode, and or this series. His attitude is much improved, but it's just so tough. As an actor, you're very fortunate, or any aspect of production, you're very fortunate to be working. And if you make it very difficult uh, to work with you, people remember. So
I'm curious because LTS, life's too short. That was a
yes,
big mantra around
yes,
the office.
yes.
Was there anyone, and I don't want names, I'm just curious as to a yes or a no. Was there
Mhm.
anyone who came across the table? It's like, oof, we've heard stories, but they are also
What?
they are also them, and you want to take a chance on them. And you had a positive experience, or oh boy, we're never bringing them back. Were there those instances, or was it always like if you heard, through the grapevine that they were trouble, that you always stayed away, even if they
Yeah,
had real big star power?
yeah, just in general, if we heard that they were problematic, then we stayed away.
Okay.
Yeah, I can't remember anyone that we ever hired that we were like, oh my gosh, this guy's going to be, or this gal's going to be trouble, and they were lovely. Just because we never, took the chance.
Hmm. There are so many. I know of a couple of back doors that were either built in by design or they were just explained that way to me and Darren over the years in
Hmm.
terms of we're going to try it with this person,
Hmm.
but in case it doesn't work out, we're going to leave their death suspicious at the end of the episode so that we can recast if need be. And in one
Yeah.
circumstance, that's exactly what happened. And it's it's just a lever, a little bit of leverage in production to be able to do things like that, where you can
Yeah, to leave the
create
door open to.
circumstances, right? So if someone really does stand up and perform, then we can make this work without having to perform a sci-fi twist to make it work, or
Yeah,
they can just shed their mortal coil.
that works. That works great in the event you're working towards like a finale. So basically, you're talking about a cast member or recurring
Or a big guest
character on
star
the
who could be
show.
recurring.
But
Yeah.
yeah, yeah, or a big guest star. I mean, another one, sort of one that comes to mind is, and the very best example of both cases, positive in a positive way, was Mark Dacascos, who was in, I think, John Wick. Was it John Wick
Yep.
2? Yeah, who we heard great things about. And I think Jason had actually knew him, and I loved him from Iron Chef, and he came and did the show, and we were supposed to kill him off in that episode. Uh, but he was such a nice guy,
Yep.
and just like really positive on set. Everybody loved him, so we brought him back for another episode, and then killed him. I mean, he was wonderful to work with. When we heard great things, and he turned out to be fantastic. So that's the very best, example. And then there are others like Robert Ricardo.
Oh God.
I loved him on Voyager, and he was a character who had to come in as kind of a pencil pushing, annoying lawyer, and Bob was so great, and his character was so much fun to write for that we rehabilitated him over the course of the franchise run, and by the end of Atlantis, he became like a beloved regular. So you never know.
That's the thing. And he is someone that I have had the privilege of spending a fair bit of time with, and he's
Hmm.
someone who knows the camera, and he
Hmm.
knows how certain things are supposed to go, and he's not pushy, but he's also has he is very aware of everything that's happening, and he's
Hmm.
involved, and there's something to be said for someone who doesn't just phone it in, but they're collaborative. Even when you're just doing an interview, it's like, okay, what do you need
Hmm.
from me over here? Is this light good? Is it? And it's he's just fantastic to work with.
Yeah, yeah,
the
yeah. He's terrific.
the one
By the way,
Yeah.
Andrew asks, I'm interested in what Joe thinks of TV making in the streaming age. Is it sustainable? Is it profitable? Does it work? I can't speak to whether or not it is profitable, but it certainly seems so since Netflix is thriving. So yeah, I mean, uh, I kind of enjoy writing for streaming shows. They tend to be more serialized and episodic. As a writer,
Hmm.
I kind of enjoy being able to create something that offers the best of both worlds. Like in the case of Dark Matter, it was episodic, but with serialized elements. And as a viewer, I kind of appreciate that kind of like storytelling, especially as a kind of an irregular viewer who will come and go and be able to enjoy an adventure with a beginning, middle, and end without having to know anything about the show previous to it. And yet, as a longtime viewer, you're rewarded with these serialized elements. So I think obviously it works very well for Netflix. And again, like as a creator and as a viewer, I enjoy that type of storytelling.
Do you think that streaming is going to continue to lend itself towards, maybe it's going to do all of this, which is entirely possible, higher quality product? God's sakes, product.
I don't think so.
Moving
To
forward,
be honest with
art.
you, I don't think so. To be honest with you, I mean, I love to say yes. I think streaming has the ability, streamers have more of an opportunity to offer kind of more big budget, serialized programming to take more chances, which is always great.
And
But
something more niche.
sure, more niche than network television. But on the other hand, for every interesting niche program, there are like 10 crap shows that are feel very much like everything else. You know, they, it, it got to the point where um, they were producing so much
Hmm.
stuff that it was unsustainable.
Hmm.
And that, as I said, everything's contracted now. It
Yeah.
just everybody spread themselves out too thin, and now we're all feeling the effects.
It's just churn and burn, baby.
Hmm.
There is something to be said for the days of what do you think of Seinfeld last night? Where
Hmm.
we all
Yeah.
had a common lexicon in terms of
Hmm.
our entertainment.
Yeah.
Only recently, movies still kind of do that because there aren't a ton of them yet. I heard
Hmm.
everyone talking about a month ago, I heard everyone talking about this film Weapons. And
Yeah.
it just
Yeah.
started like all of a sudden I was hearing about this and I went and saw it. And I was like, that was so cool. We
Hmm.
don't have we're not moored to each other anymore through entertainment. We only seem to be
Hmm.
moored to each other through politics. And that
Hmm.
sucks. It
Hmm.
absolutely
Yeah.
destroys a culture
Yeah. Yeah.
if that's all that you've got. And
Yeah.
I fear that we're in a frame of white noise now because there's just so much stuff. There's good
Yeah.
stuff to be had, of
Hmm.
course, but you have to dig to find it.
Hmm. Yeah, I agree. I mean, like I said, there's just so much programming out there, and there's a lot of good programming as well. So it's really hard for something to pop.
Hmm. Let's see what we've got here. What did you think, Simon Durko? Did you ever have a chance to hear about or take a look at the legacy books that continued the SGA story? Did you have a peek at any
I
of them?
did not at all. I did
Okay.
not.
Is
So
that
I
another
can't
one of
really
those
speak to the.
circumstances where if it's going to be going in its own direction
No,
that you just don't want to get it stuck in your head, or did it just not interest you?
no. I mean, don't get me wrong. I'm sure the books are great, but it's just not something I would kind of be interested in reading it, or any sort of um, show or film tie-ins. It's just not you know, not the kind of reading I would prefer.
Did you hear that they there was really no choice, but they gave the Wraith names,
Oh, okay.
right?
Okay. I don't know. I don't know. I mean, like
they had
it
to
sounds kind of it sounds kind of weird, but I mean,
they had to distinguish
you
them
know,
in the book
yeah.
because they wanted a Wraith
Hmm.
perspective, and there was no.
Hmm.
And it's one of those questions. It's like if you
Hmm.
have no names for these things, and you're going to
Hmm.
tell a story from their perspective, how do you
Hmm.
differentiate when they're just
Hmm.
black and white?
Hmm.
It's one of those logistical problems that we had them
Yeah.
on the show, and there was no other way to overcome it other
Well,
than to give them like
I,
nicknames.
yeah, I mean, I say it's weird, only because I mean, within the context of the show, it would have been weird, but in the context of fleshing out their world and their uh, social structure, in book series, it makes perfect sense.
Hmm. What if you could come back and tackle Stargate in one more genre? If you could chew on that genre for like a one or two parter, what do you think would be good? The show always did horror, in my opinion,
Yeah, I mean,
exceptionally well, and
yeah,
like a CSI one with Vegas for Rob Cooper. What do you
yeah.
think would fit that you guys didn't
That
really
we didn't do, I
try?
can't imagine. I
Yeah.
mean, we kind of did fantasy with the kind of the Arthurian
Hmm.
stuff. What other? I mean, we did crime, like you said, with Vegas. We did horror with,
I'm thinking of some newer
like
ones like
Whispers.
Battle Royale, and things like that, where I mean, there was some similar ones, but like stuck inside of an arena, and the team having to fight against other teams. It'd definitely be so cliche at this point, but
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah,
the,
I don't know. I don't know.
the gate's in the center.
Yeah, I don't know. I think, when I think a genre, I think let's say fantasy,
Yeah.
horror, sci-fi, but then I think like the subgenre, like military sci-fi, even though SG-1 was military, it would be kind of interesting to, for instance, I was at the end of Universe's run, I was imagining a third season. What could, what could the new enemy be? And I kind of like the idea of kind of, coming up against kind of a militaristic race of aliens or descendants. That kind of would have been very interesting to me. I kind of always kind of like military sci-fi as well.
It's definitely a core component of
Hmm.
the show. I always related so much of the show to the Colonial Marines and Aliens, that kind of, not as gruff and
Hmm.
unhinged, but certainly in terms of the camaraderie and the relationship among the people of the unit. There's a lot of similar threads there,
Hmm.
and I wish that was leveraged a little bit more. I would have loved to have spent some more time with a couple of those teams that came through the Stargate and Ripple Effect, where it was like, okay, I
Hmm.
want to know where those guys come from because they're the ones who are chewing gum
Yeah.
because they look like they're a fun time.
Yeah, that was a fun episode. Actually, that was probably one of my favorite episodes. Just the ability to, you know, come up with all these alternate SG1s, and yeah.
Was there a concern ever? Concern maybe isn't the right word. One of the things that I talked about with Coop earlier on was they were trying to figure out how to communicate to the audience. When the show was still young, there was a question from the layman who was not familiar with Stargate. Okay, but what does
Mhm.
it do? What's happening? Is it a time travel device? Is it a dimensional device? Is it just are we just shifting locations? Is it just a door? And it was pretty far established that the gate didn't do dimensional shifting. Then
Mhm.
you're in season 9 and you have a story where it does that.
Mhm.
Were there ever stories that you guys wanted to consider, or was there ever a conversation about ripple effect where it's like, if if it's another bag of tricks that we're giving the Stargate, at what are we concerned about convoluting this technology? Okay, now it can do this. I mean, what was
Yeah.
there a
No,
like was the
I,
Stargate like a sacred device for you guys in terms of, okay, we have to be really careful with what it does because
we
it
were
can't just be
always,
a free for all.
yes, we were always very careful with what it did. I mean, Brad and Robert were kind of sticklers about, once you establish the sci-fi concept, you don't kind of play fast and loose with the rules. That being said, in rare instances, uh, this Stargate would operate in surprising ways. When the solar flare, then it becomes, it
Mm-hmm.
could send you back in time, and so yeah, in rare instances, it was just because I mean, after like 8, 9, seasons or so, um, you want to kind of play with the established formula. So as long as we always established the fact that this was a rare circumstance that could rarely be repeated, we did it.
If the story is strong enough, give the
Hmm.
show a chance to pull off.
Hmm.
There were some instances where it was like, especially with specific characters,
Yeah,
Fred Willard, um,
yeah, he's great.
he was fantastic. The 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 character I was wishy washy on, but when
Hmm.
you get a caliber actor,
Yeah,
they can pull pretty much anything off,
yeah,
and another one like Dom DeLuise with
yes,
Ergo is just,
yeah.
man, oh
Great
man.
comic. Yeah, comic timing is everything. We used to love to write comedy for the show. Or, by the way, Jonathan G95 asked Joe, would you be interested in writing for Star Wars in the future, given the opportunity? I would say no, but thank you. Um, Judah Khan, was there an unresolved storyline you would have liked to see finished? Huh. I
Oh,
think
pick
back,
one.
yeah, I mean, I guess there were plenty of unresolved storylines. I'm trying to think um, I mean, besides the obvious, the general series itself, Atlantis and Universe.
Specific threads.
Uh,
Weir always
yeah,
drove me nuts. I
weird.
always wanted to have another one of those.
Oh,
And you
yeah,
finally closed the loop on that with season 6, the proposed ideas for season 6. Thank you so much for
Yeah.
that, by the
Well,
way.
at the end of the day, it's just fan fiction, right? At this point.
I don't
So,
care. You made the rest of the show.
yeah.
That's good
Hmm.
as far as I'm concerned.
Hmm.
They're locked away in my brain that way.
Hmm.
But that's a really great question. I'd like to spend a moment with it, because
Hmm.
obviously you've got the larger issues of Atlantis completing its mission in eradicating the Wraith. One of the things that you always said that I think was interesting, and I think Brad backed it up, was I think around 2018 I asked him, would would extinction have been the end of the Wraith? And he said, no, it would have been an expansion. And I
Yeah.
thought that was a really interesting idea, because I think we've got it into our head, especially with the conclusion of SG-1, that with Atlantis, if it were to properly resolve itself, it would have to be the extinction of the Wraith, or the pacification of them, maybe. But I think an expansion, I think going against the typical expectation and turning them into something more or something different would be an interesting approach.
Yeah, I mean, the extinction would have ended with an understanding between Todd and Sheppard, that would have kind of opened the door to a potential alliance among certain, sectors or kind of Wraith. So, that would have been kind of interesting to pursue in season 6, but sadly, we never got the chance. We never even got to make that movie, which is disappointing.
Just a little bit.
Hang on, what did let me see. Sorry, I missed a bunch of.
I totally love you. Be my guest. I'm loving this.
Do you have to go to a company with complete story, start to finish?
Oh, that's a good question.
When you go out to pitch, you usually should know where the show is going. So I usually go in with obviously, your story idea. Usually, if you have a pilot script written, fantastic. If not, you should have a very detailed idea of what happens in your pilot script, an idea of what happens in the first season, the various character arcs, maybe give a few examples of episodes, and maybe they will ask you what happens in season 2, what happens in season 3. So yeah, you should have like a fairly detailed vision of your show. That doesn't mean you have to necessarily pitch the detailed vision of the show. I mean, I think you want to keep the pitch about 20 minutes long, certainly no more than 30 minutes long when you're going out to pitch.
Has security gotten worse on things like that, in terms of the expectations of not getting the number of, not necessarily the doors that you have to go through to get into the building, but in terms of sharing files online, these kinds of things, especially when you're dealing with more high stakes, high profit projects? In general, has the trend just gotten worse, in the industry, or is it?
What do you mean in terms of?
In terms of the fear of things leaking early.
I'm sure. Yeah. I mean, I'm sure. I mean, I've never worked on one of those productions. I mean, on Stargate, I was fairly open about keeping the fans in the loop during production. When Dark Matter started, we were shooting on the stages, the old Law Scroll stages. There were all these no photos, kind of pictograms all over the place, and I took all those down. Because I've always been a firm believer in kind of looping the fans in early and getting them excited about a show. Unless it's like, you don't want to give away any spoilers, but why not reveal the look of the ship, or shots of the characters and such. On the other hand, on the flip side, you have the Star Trek that was always very secretive. I remember while they were shooting Discovery, some I think like a background actor was eating in the cafeteria, and he snapped a photo of the Klingons, and he was like, "Hey, look, it's the Klingons," and posted it on Instagram.
Their looks were updated.
Hell broke loose.
Their looks were updated. Yeah.
Yeah, and all hell broke loose. And
Yeah.
I think they may have changed the look after that.
They sure did.
It's kind of crazy.
Mm-hmm.
I
Yeah,
mean, why?
they tried to retcon it.
Really? Really?
Why did they change the look from the original?
No. Actually, I think they changed the look in the production.
Yep. Yeah, halfway through the show, because there was such an outcry. Yeah, it was too much of a departure, in my opinion, and I agreed with them.
Mm.
That's the double-edged side of it. When it's not always necessarily going to be sunshine and rainbows when some stuff gets out. You can actually, in some cases, turn off viewers who have their mind made up. One of the things, can I ask you about?
I have to argue though,
please,
that the fans would have reacted the same way whether they had seen those photos online, as opposed to basically watching the show when it airs. So it just, it just would have been delaying the inevitable.
That's certainly true. I mean, what the difference is whether they would have not turned it on at all or would they have stopped watching it halfway through. At the end of the day, I agree with you. The end result is exactly the same. One of the things that has always, we're getting ready to wrap up here. One of the things that has always confused me, and maybe you won't be able to answer this, but maybe you can glean some insight. Gate World, where I started, always had, not for always, but fairly early on, like seasons 5, 6, and 7, had access to casting sites. And these were pieces of information that were sent out over a service that had literal pages of drafts or the anticipated shooting script in it for actors to read. And I remember getting one from Darren about Chimera. And it was a dream sequence between Osiris and Daniel. And I remember thinking to myself, Osiris has been cast. Why am I seeing this and they're shooting it next week? How do I have access to this? It never made sense to me because it's like there's no one in this scene that has anything to do with that. The only thing that I can think of was it was a scene that was sandwiched in between a couple of other scenes, and that was just sent off. Do you think that may have been the reason that it was? Like they were looking for Pete Shanahan or his boss? Yeah,
unless there was, if it was just an Osiris Daniel scene and no one else was in the scene, then I think it was just kind of included mistakenly. Or sandwiched between them because, like I said, unless there's a third character there who was supposed to be cast,
exactly.
That I don't know why that would go out.
Was there a system ever in place to say these pages, you can't send these out? You cannot send these pages out.
Yeah, I think at the beginning, no. And then when we started to get, fans started to get a little more resourceful and gaining access, then I think, we took steps to kind of ensure that that didn't happen as often. But for the most part, I mean, they were not very spoiler heavy. The scenes that we would send out. So it wasn't like that big a deal. I just, I remember we got it was a huge blowback during SGU for that. What was the episode where it was a body swapping episode? And fans and I know someone was having a relationship with someone else in someone else's body, which opened a whole can of worms. And the fans, voiced their displeasure. And then there was this whole kind of,
I remember wishing that there had at least been a scene that addressed, well, I mean, we signed the forms, this, and that would have done it for me. But one of those lingering questions for me was always, where is the consent? There has to be some kind of something because. When I suddenly become unplugged and no longer in the Destiny, do I have to go to the doctor and get tested now just to take care of myself as a matter of course? But the sci-fi stuff you guys were really good at, where there was or like early in SGU, there was the discovery that so Destiny is being powered by the stars. Well, naturally, we're going to try to dial home while near a star. That only makes absolute sense. Yeah. So the stuff that mattered to the lore, you guys were like, this is the next logical step. So we must address this and go there, or at least talk about it. So you made it work.
Yeah, thank you.
Do you remember who blew the whistle on Janet's death? Do you remember how that got out?
How it got out?
Yeah. Because I don't think that was one through sides.
Oh, I did not realize that actually that got, I didn't
Oh God, boy, did it.
that did it?
Oh,
I
yeah.
don't recall.
6 months in advance.
Okay. Yeah, that one I did not realize that it got out early.
And if you had your ear remotely close to the ground, that's the flip side of fandom that I hated.
Yeah.
It's like nothing is that you can hardly keep anything anymore.
Yeah. Oh, well, pursuant to that, Andrew asked, Joe's probably spoken about this, but does he worry about extreme fan emotions in the 2020s? I think it has become too crazy online about shows like The Ring of Power, etc. I always likened fandom to a double-edged sword.
Yeah.
Fans are very passionate, and if you stay on their good side, they will support you to the ends of the earth. And if you betray them, they will cut you. But in the, with regard to sort of programming today, to be fair, and I know like a lot of people are like, oh, just don't watch it, what have you, but a lot of fans have fallen in love with certain franchises.
Yeah.
And new creators come on board, and they will just change things up, what feels like just for the hell of it. They will not respect canon. They will not respect the tone of previous incarnations. It's like a lot of those Marvel shows. Sorry.
You're sure?
A lot of the Marvel shows, I hear fans complaining, and I'm like, I don't watch the Marvel shows. What are you complaining about? Like, I love the comic books. And then I'll see interviews with the writers of these shows, and they're like, oh yeah, we never read the comic books. They told us not to read the comic books. And it's like,
right.
Why don't you just go to make up your own universe then? If you want to sort of do something completely different, why?
Because there's already an in-universe explanation if you want to know the real answer.
What is the in-universe explanation for?
The MCU Earth is designated Earth-199999. That's the slice of reality that the MC universe operates on.
Okay, so the MCU universe operates on I get the multiverse. So basically, it operates in a universe that is removed from the original.
That's correct.
In its kind of many ways. So I guess I would ask, why didn't anyone think of sort of adapting the original?
That's a great answer or question. The only thing I can do is ask you, could you have stood creating a shot-for-shot recreation of something original without feeling compelled to make any of it your own as a creator?
I would argue you don't have to do a shot-by-shot recreation. For me, if you remain true to the essence of the characters and the tone of the original IP, you can, update it for contemporary audiences or what have you. But when you betray those original characters and the original tone, I feel as though you're asking for it. And, as a result, fans, I feel, in many cases, not all, because I think, there are a lot of crazy fans out there, but they have been kind of rightly upset.
And what if you resent, as a creator, the original creator of the content? Think that they were a product of their time and think that it's time that we reset this for a modern audience. What would you say to that?
You're free to think that, but I think the ones who are culpable there are the executives who hire this new creator to reimagine a vision for a show they detested in some ways.
Or an original product that they
Yeah.
detested.
Yeah. But I mean, the fact that a lot of these writers were not at all familiar with the original source material, I think is wild. But anyways,
I agree. I think that
yeah.
if you are to utilize an IP as a skin suit to Trojan horse your own ideas, whether I agree with them or
Hmm.
not,
Hmm.
I think that you're doing something pretty
And
sacrilegious.
I think it really comes down to, I mean, we're going to get into this. I mean, uh, it really comes down to again, like being respectful to what has come before. I mean, you can update it and sort of introduce new characters or anything, just as long as you respect the original, because there are a lot of fans of the originals, and it's something like we talk about now. We're going to get into sort of kind of messaging,
Hmm.
which is something that people discuss online, and it's like
Hmm.
there's so much messaging in these shows and that shows, and other people rightly point out there's always been messaging in sci-fi, which is true, but I would argue that the clunky, hit you over the head type of messaging that has become de rigueur in today's sci-fi was few and far between in the sci-fi of old. I think the writing, in some ways it was clunky, but in other ways it's far more clever and subtle in relaying its messages. Whereas now it's like, you have to hit
Hmm.
the viewers over the head with this message, or they won't get it. And
Hmm.
the problem is that um, there's kind of that heavy-handed messaging, which makes you feel like you're watching kind of this, hour-long, PSA with wonderful visual effects. But all the shows seem to cover the same ground and the same messaging, and after a while, it just becomes tiresome.
Can I
Um,
just cut to the chase?
yeah.
I think many writers now don't trust that their audiences can think for themselves. I think many writers now, many people who are creating content for the masses, don't trust that audience to make the
I,
right
I
choices for themselves. They have to be told what to think because
yeah,
they are idiots.
I would agree, and this is one thing that my former writing partner Paul pointed out to me, that the reason I would always get notes on the scripts to make this more obvious, or and he would say you're giving the audience too much credit, and maybe I did. I would always imagine, you're a sci-fi audience, you're gonna put the pieces together. I, as a viewer, always loved shows like The Sopranos, where you weren't spoon-fed necessarily the message or the various story elements, but are left to sort of piece it together. So that when you do piece it together, it becomes so much more dramatically satisfying.
Ah!
But
Yeah,
yeah, yes. But nowadays, a lot of programming, like I've had executives tell me that they want the type of programming that you can be doing something else. You can be multitasking. You can be doing a vacuum while the TV is on in the background. And if you go to toss out the dog poop for 5 minutes and come back, you'll be
that's
able to
right.
sort of continue watching. And I guess that's one form of
There are those shows
entertainment.
that
But
that's
but
okay.
yeah,
But do you want
yeah.
to work in that genre
I
or
I
that
personally would
slice?
not want to work in that
Exactly.
genre. No,
Yeah.
no.
Have you seen um, Annihilation?
Speaking of which, the movie.
Hmm.
Yeah, yeah, I actually love Jeff Vandermeer. He's one of my favorite
They, they
weird writers. And I
it,
say basically weird as in a kind of subgenre of horror sci-fi.
well, let me park that for a second. You said speaking of which, do you need does the dog need to go out?
No, 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 no.
Oh, okay. But you're
Yeah,
good.
yeah.
So they were talking about, I think it was Paramount that released it,
Hmm.
and Paramount said this thing is going to go over the audience heads.
Hmm. Hmm.
This is a trilogy. We really want this
Hmm.
to succeed. You have to, for want of a better term, dumb it down for a little bit more of a modern audience,
Hmm.
a larger group of people. And the writers said, no, we are adapting
Hmm.
this from the first book. And the movie was brilliant
Yeah,
and cerebral, and it
yeah.
failed.
Hmm.
but
Hmm.
they made something that was faithful to the original, and I'm thrilled that it exists, even though it's
Yeah.
only one. And that's the two-sided thing. Do you want to make
Yeah.
it authentic and risk making it inaccessible to people, or do you want to make it a little bit more palatable? There's a dance that goes back and forth.
Yeah, there's no guarantee. I mean, the guys cutting the checks or the gals cutting the checks usually has a lot of say, and I'm sure they would have loved to have seen, a more commercial venture, and a better return on their investment. But that movie is kind of a standout for me. I mean, I mean, there has to be, I think, a middle ground
Yeah,
at the end of the day, because I mean, just making it palatable to and commercial doesn't guarantee success either. So.
yeah, yeah. Annihilation, Ex Machina is another one. I
Yeah,
think
I
it's
love
it's,
Ex
it's
Machina. Yeah,
immensely accessible, and I think that
yeah.
the one that really walks the line and succeeds is Arrival.
Mm.
Because you can have cerebral ideas where you get to the end of the film and go, whoa, that's not
Hmm.
behind, that's ahead. And if you
Yeah,
haven't seen
yeah,
it, that's all I'm going to say.
yeah,
Go and
yeah,
drop
yeah,
everything and watch it now.
yeah,
Then you
yeah.
can challenge your audience. Um, but this has been so wonderful to sit down and catch up with you and talk about the broader strokes for the industry and the road that is ahead, and what's to come. Are you leveraging, before I let you go, AI in any way to help you creatively?
Um,
Or are you steering clear from it like stink on a monkey?
I think we have to be realistic. I know that, uh, you know, people are worried, rightly so, about AI coming and taking everyone's jobs. Uh, that said, I mean, AI is the future, and the challenge is to find a way to, like you said, leverage, uh, to meet your own goals. Um, I think worst case scenario, you see the studio using AI to create uh, crappy scripts,
Mm-hmm.
or AI generated talent. But
I mean, worst case scenario,
realistically, I
we're all
think
AI pod people, but hey, you know.
yes, 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 that's a worst case scenario. But realistically, I think the studio are the ones who could be in trouble, because
Yeah,
I think the creatives are the one with the talent.
yeah.
The studios are the middlemen. They're the ones with the
Mm-hmm.
money who basically, allow you to, deign to, allow you to make your work public. But with AI, that will eventually afford creators the opportunity to, get their own work out there. I've spoken to like people who work in the kind of the AI field and talking about, um, um, launching platforms that use AI, but in a way that allows, actors and creatives to get a piece of that pie. So, I understand why everyone's afraid, but I think realistically, you can't really resist
That's
the advance of technology. For me personally, I mean, I can't imagine using AI to write.
oh
Because
god.
I think just writing is just such a personal thing.
Yeah.
I like to use AI. I do use AIs for research purposes.
Mm-hmm.
It's just so much easier if I want to, for this pitch that I'm doing on Wednesday. I need examples of, uh, uh, you know, technological advancements that initially undermined religion, and yet a religion found a way to sort of,
Mm-hmm.
adapt alongside it,
Mm-hmm.
and they will give me examples of that. So that in that respect, it's amazing what it can do from a research standpoint. I continue to be unconvinced that it will be able to produce scripts, very good scripts. I will admit that it probably will have the ability to uh, deliver average or subpar scripts, which, let's be honest, reflects about, I think, 50% of the output, Hollywood industry output. But I don't think it can ever, or maybe at some point it will, but the last thing it will be able to do is comedy. And
Yeah.
that'll be kind of a challenge, especially kind of a subtle or kind of
Timing.
throwaway humor. Yeah.
That's an astute
So
observation.
yeah,
Yeah.
that's what I feel.
When we're born, we can make any phoneme that the
Hmm.
human body can produce. And when
Hmm.
we're adults, we are locked into our mode of thinking where we can only communicate through that track because our neural pathways are already fixed by mid 20s. Similarly, Gabe Newell, who is the head of Valve, made an interesting point a couple of months ago talking about AI and programming with
Hmm.
people helping to teach. I've used it to write Python code, for instance, for Dial the Gate and been successful
Hmm.
at it. He said that there is going to be quite possibly a period where programmers can be outstripped by people who are using AI to program for the first time because they're not buttressed by an architecture of you must think of it this way. Someone who
Hmm.
has no familiarity with programming, but whose instincts are good, can use the tool to create something
Yeah.
absolutely original. And I think
Hmm.
right there, that is the valley where a lot of money can be made. So it's going to be
Yeah.
interesting to see.
Yep. I agree. I agree.
Can we see Sharky before you go?
Yeah. Hang on. Hang on. Sharky, come here, buddy.
Sharky!
Oh.
I've been looking forward to this all week. Oh, there's the
All
boy!
right. He was as usual
Ah,
napping. He had
look
a
at
big
that
walk today.
face.
Up. Yeah. Well, kind of a big walk. He basically walked partway up the street. Um, yeah.
Is he loving life?
Yeah.
Is he doing good? How's
He
his
is. He
health?
loves his mom. His health is great. He's
Ah,
around 10 now. We adopted him 2 years ago. No eyes, if you're wondering why he has
yeah.
his eyes closed. We got him on the heels of Suji, which was our last
Yes.
gal. We adopted her when she was 12 and she passed away at 18 and 4 months. And then we're like, okay, we're just gonna go travel now because we were never able to travel with Suji just because she was so high maintenance. And then, a month later we got him and had to readjust all our travel plans.
Absolutely.
Um,
Well, you know what? Life is better with a dog. It
I agree.
it
I
it
agree.
it really is. I mean, there is uh have you been pleased with the feedback that he gets online?
Yes,
He
absolutely.
has
Although
the link is
he
in the
has a mere
description below, folks.
he has a mere 10,000 followers, a little less than 10,000 followers on Instagram. So forget about following me. Go over to Instagram and find Hey Sharky Hey. And my wife Akemi manages his account and
Ah,
posts update on the daily. So there we go.
there is something to be
He's a
said
lot
for
more
looking through the eyes
interesting,
of a
I'll be
dog.
honest with you. He's a
Yeah.
lot more interesting than I am.
Well, thank her for letting us borrow you for this long,
Oh,
and I
yeah.
really
My
appreciate
pleasure.
always sitting down with you and being able to pick your brain and just wander through
Yeah.
the work that you guys created that means so much to us. And
Yeah. At the
the other
time
thing,
you're working and it's very hard and you don't really think
yeah,
much about it. But once time has passed and you look back, you think back, wow, I can't, it's imagine. It's hard to imagine, all the work that went into that
mhm,
and everything we created.
mhm. I don't see us talking about most of this product that streamers are kicking out
Hmm.
30 years from now. This show was not product. This show was something that meant something to people, and it means something to us because, like our earlier conversation, it entertains first. If there is a
Yes.
message, it is
Yes,
never first, and I think
I
that's the
agree.
difference.
Yeah. Well said. Well said.
Joseph Mallozzi, thank you, sir.
David, good to see you. You can find me at on X, by the way, Baron Destructo. Jen, longtime Sharky fan, says, please let's see a return of Sharky Sunday to X. And yes, I will start reposting Sharky videos on my X
Perfect.
timeline as well.
Yep, the link is in the description below, folks. Appreciate
All
your
right.
time. Joe, as always, thank you so much.
Thank you all. See you online.
Thank you. Joseph Mallozzi, everyone, writer and executive producer for Stargate. My name is David Reed. You're watching the Stargate Oral History Project, Dial the Gate. We have no Wormhole Extremists coming up for you today. We've got sick Nicole. So Nicole's going to go and rest. And we will meet you guys back here, not next week, but the week after that. I'm working out some new episodes right now with a number of folks. We're just trying to nail everything down and straighten everything out. So we'll see how this unfolds. If you enjoy Stargate and you want to see more content like this on YouTube, please click the like button. It does help with the show and will continue to help us grow our audience. Please also consider sharing this video with a Stargate friend. And if you want to get notified about future episodes, click subscribe. And giving the bell icon a click will notify you the moment a new video drops, and you'll get my notifications of any last-minute guest changes. And clips from this episode will be released over the course of the next few weeks on both the Dial the Gate and GateWorld.net YouTube channels. Since we had audio problems on the first half of this, I'm going to unplug the live stream and re-upload this as a pre-recorded episode in just a moment here, so you can actually hear me for the first 20 minutes of the show. Sometimes we just have to find things out the hard way. So I really appreciate Joe for being patient with me, and all of you out there watching as well. I don't think I have any unanswered questions for me. I think we are good. Marsha's writing something, but I don't think that that's meant for me. So, my moderators. Thank you so much to my moderators. Anthony, Jeremy, Kevin, Lockwatcher, Marsha, Raj, and Jacob. Really appreciate you guys. You make the show possible week after week. My producers, Anthony Rowling, Kevin Weaver, Summer Roy, and Bryce Orrs. Matt Eagle S.G. Wilson for his beautiful renders of our ships at the beginning of the show. And Frederick Marcoux at Concepts Web. He keeps dialthegate.com up and running. Stay tuned because more is happening really soon. Just keep an eye out for more Stargate content on youtube.com/dialthegate and over at dialthegate.com. My name is David Reed. I will see you guys on the other side.